in this video, I'm going to be talking about water a lot. I'm going to be talking about Mary Magdalene a little bit more, because in this video right here, I talked about how Mary Magdalene could have been a witch, okay, and which is very important. I'm going to talk about all that. And I'm going to talk about the Primordial Sea a little bit, and the deeper meaning behind sea monsters and all this stuff, okay. So this is like a water video. And I'm going to talk about some of that connection that they have in the Bible with this things traveling through water, okay. Alright. So in this video, I talked about how, you know, there's a reason why there's lots of revelation in the way people are called. Mary Magdalene, I know Magdalene in Hebrew I think just means tower, but God uses that version. But Megalodon means a whale, okay? Just like the Oracle of Delphi, her name means dolphin, okay? Why? Because in the ancient world, and there's obviously a connection with that with Jonah and the whale, obviously. Okay, there's a weird connection between all of this stuff. Jonah and the whale, Mary Magdalene, and Oracle Delphi. It's because in the ancient world, they used whales as messengers. Okay? They used whales as messengers. Whales represented as messengers. They were like angels. Because they, why? Because this was a description to describe people who can travel through the primordial sea. Okay, which is just another weird way of saying spirit world. You can say it like that. They travel through the primordial sea. That's the deeper meaning behind all these sea monsters. It's not just talking about the literal ocean. Okay. Even in Japan, they have a sea monster named Umbuzu. Okay, Umbuzu. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Probably not. But Umbuzu just means preacher or priest, which is the same thing as, very similar to saying a prophet or a messenger. Okay. And that's what this video is going to be about. God really uses these concepts. Okay. He really, really does. And of course, there's always a good version and a bad version. Okay. There are evil spirits who travel through the primordial sea, and there are good spirits. Okay. And there are people who do it too. Okay. Like psychics and witches. Okay. But some of God's prophets travel through the primordial sea. And I'm going to show you the evidence of that. Okay. It's all over in the Bible. It's actually the very first creature to travel through the primordial sea is God. It's literally the very first paragraph in the Bible. Okay, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Even that word deep is another word for sea monster, by the way. Okay, that word deep in Hebrew, it's the same word for they use for Tiamat. Okay, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, so this is not just talking about God traveling through literal water. This is talking about the primordial sea. Okay, what is the primordial sea? It means a lot of different things. The primordial sea is a spirit world, but it's a substance that that all creation comes out of. Okay, it's something that everything is made out of. It's made from the primordial sea, okay? And some people will bring in, like sexual stuff, because when you are a sperm, you travel through the primordial sea, and when you have sex, okay, you mix fluids together, and then a baby happens, okay? So everything comes out of the primordial sea, okay? It's how you're born, okay? Even Adam, when he was made, he came out of mud. That's probably a slight reference to the primordial sea, okay? But God is the first one there. He was the guy who did that first, okay? And then he made everyone else through the primordial sea, okay? Everyone is made from the pond scum, okay? And you can use real life situations to describe the literal version. In real life, you are formed out of nothing. You are made from the primordial sea. It's the embryonic fluid, right? First, there's lots of liquids going on, okay? There's lots of liquids going on. You can really use that, because when man and girl meet, they exchange fluids, and the fluids connect in your womb, and then you slowly start taking form. You basically look like a little ball of clay, and then you slowly start taking form, like Adam, right? Like clay, right? You can use real life things, yes. But it's doing it on more of a spiritual version, okay? The primordial sea is a more spiritual version of that, okay? It's very interesting, because they say now that even when the sperm meets the egg, there's a flash of light, that happens, when that I guess there's a magical flash of light. Maybe that's where God puts the soul. Okay, there's a flash of light, which is very interesting because that's probably why God said, "Let there be light," because it's talking about that flash of light. It's talking about birth. It's talking about the real things you can understand. See, so you can think of embryonic fluid, and it also reminds me of eggs. And eggs is just goop, right? In the middle, it's yolk, and it's white stuff. It's just goop, and somehow it makes a chicken or a bird or a snake. Okay, it makes life. It's a goop. It's pond scum that makes life. Okay, but the primordial sea is like more of a spiritual version of that. Okay, and you travel through it. Okay, and God uses the primordial sea means lots of things. Okay, it means spirit world, and it's a substance that we're all made from. Okay, and it's very interesting because even in the Syrian Babylonian story, they have almost the exact same story. There is a sea monster. She's a woman. The reason why they use women a lot because women actually give birth. Okay, Assyrian Babylonian story, they have almost the exact same story as what I just read. There's Tiamat, which in Hebrew means the deep. Okay, and she swims. She's a dragon. She's a sea monster, but she swims in the primordial sea. Okay, and she gives birth to everyone, to everything and everyone. Basically, she gives birth to everyone. She's the creator of all living things, and it's very interesting because even in the Tiamat storyline, and the Bible storyline is the same. So God makes people, then he regrets it, and then he kills everyone. And Tiamat does the same thing. She gives birth to everyone, and then she regrets it and decides to kill everyone. She doesn't. She just decides to delete her creations. Okay, it's a very similar storyline, and it's not a coincidence. Okay. So people back then would have read the Bible. They would have thought of Tiamat probably, which is not a coincidence. But God is saying he did it, not someone else. Okay. Even in the Egyptian religion, they have these women who are priests who guide people through the primordial sea. Okay, and that's why God refers to the Israelites as a woman a lot. Okay, God even refers to the Israelites as a sea monster. Alright, he refers to the Israelites as a woman a lot because God uses the parallelism, okay? It's the men too, but again, God uses the women because the whole giving birth metaphors, okay? And keep in mind that these concepts kept going and going and going. That's probably why people started putting angels, okay? Angels who are women, okay? In front of boats and ships because they're supposed to guide you through the sea, literally. Okay, and that's probably why they still do that to this day. And like I've said before in a previous video, that's probably why to this day you put emblems in front of cars. Okay, in the front and back of cars, because these are supposed to be tokens to keep you going. They're supposed to guide you through your journey. Okay, and even to this day, people name their boats and cars after women, right? They usually have a female name. That's because these concepts go back to the beginning of time, and people just reuse them, and they just copy it. And God uses that. God uses our current understanding of what's going on, okay? Of how we say things now, all right? And then God also uses the birthing metaphors, but he also uses the marriage stuff with this woman, okay? So now we're going to talk about that. And there's definitely and there's lots of meaning, okay? We're going to keep going, okay? This is a deep Bible study, okay? So, there's lots of covenants next to water because they use water as for a covenant, for binding material, okay? Did you ever notice that God, the angel of the Lord or Jesus, you ever notice that he meets unclean women next to a pool of water? Okay, that he meets an unclean woman next to a well or water. Okay, there's a deep meaning in that. God uses many things. Okay, there's Hagar and there's a Samaritan woman, right? And him having a conversation next to that pool of water, and out in the middle of nowhere it's talking about communicating through the primordial sea, and it's talking about crossing it. Okay, he's asking her to marry him. I'll bring that up in a minute. And there's lots of covenant talk, okay? there's lots of covenant talk, and there's marriage next to wells. Okay, there's lots of communication next to wells. It's very powerful. Okay, this is about, and there's a marriage. There is definitely a marriage metaphor, which I'll bring up in a minute. Okay, a covenant. Okay, even when Abraham sent his servant for Isaac's wife, he asked her hand in marriage next to a well of water. Okay, one of the meanings is that you're supposed to, Jesus and God crossed the Primordial Sea, and you are too. You're supposed to cross the Primordial Sea to get to Him. Okay, and a really good example of that is okay, so when Abraham when he fell asleep, he woke up, okay, and he crosses this river of blood. Okay, he has to cross on the river of blood, and on the other side of that is supposed to be God holding a torch. He's asking Abraham to meet him there on the other side. Okay, he's asking him to meet him to travel through the blood, which is really old covenant talk. Okay, it's binding material, and when you cross it, you're supposed to meet God through the other side because God already crossed it. Okay, and you're supposed to meet Him on the other side. So let's use that. Okay, so these women, they're on the other side of this well of water, and you have to remember that Jesus and God are trying to save these people, these unclean women. Okay, and he's talking to them next to this pool or pond of water. That is a reference to the Primordial Sea. Okay, it's for communication and for crossing. Okay, you're not supposed to get stuck in the middle of the Primordial Sea. You're supposed to cross all the way through it. Okay, and God uses that again with Noah. Okay, Noah and his family crossed the Primordial Sea, and they made it all the way through. Okay, okay, and the Israelites crossing the Red Sea and the Egyptians getting stuck halfway through is an example of you getting stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, that's why there's unclean women stuck in the middle of nowhere. He meets them in the middle of nowhere. Okay, and he uses the spirit world to talk to these women. Okay, and he's asking them to cross the river. Okay, and so yeah, he's asking them to cross over but not get stuck. You're supposed to go all the way through, not fall asleep in the middle of the river. Okay, or get stuck in there. And then there's a Bible passage that supports that. He also brought me up out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock. Okay, so this is God saving you from being stuck, right? Okay, and even in the Greek, we'll use the Greek myths. Okay, even in the Greek myths, these monsters, they're stuck on islands, right? There's the Minotaur, there's Medusa, and there's Cyclops. There's monsters stuck on islands, and they're supposed to be bad because they didn't make it through the Primordial Sea. They got stuck. They got stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, and a hero has to come and save them. Okay, the heroes on the obvious are like Perseus and that. Okay, but the hero, I'm gonna say the hero is God. Okay, obviously. That's a deeper meaning of why these monsters are stuck out in the middle of an island. Just like the Egyptians got stuck in the middle of the Red Sea. Just like when Lot's wife, she made it about halfway up that island. They were crawling out of they were leaving the Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot's wife made it about halfway up that mountain. Okay, it's about not making it all the way. It's about getting stuck in the middle. It's about being lost. Okay. And I'll give you the Bible passage. The wild beasts of the desert shall meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the screech owl shall also rest there and find herself a place of rest. Okay, this is very interesting because it's talking about being stuck out in the middle of nowhere and being stuck on that island, just like those Greek monsters. They got stuck out on an island, right? Okay, and it's about being stuck there. You don't want to be stuck there forever. You still have the chance to be saved, okay? Don't get stuck out there forever, okay? Because that's hell. If you get stuck out on the island forever, that's hell, okay? You're going to be stuck in hell forever. You're going to be stuck in the middle of the abyss. You're going to be lost forever. Okay, so God does make a biblical reference to this island, you being stuck out there. And it's so funny because even Lot's wife is stuck out there somewhere. And that's why he crosses the abyss and meets you out there in the middle. He meets you on your own level most of the time. God will meet you on your own level. He'll talk to you in a way that you can understand, and he'll ask you. He wants you to cross the Primordial Sea. He wants you to make the covenant. Okay, he'll ask your hand in marriage, spiritually. Okay, that's why there's also in the Bible there's marriage next to those wells, because all of it's connected. Just connect all the stories. Okay, he meets an unclean woman out in the wilderness. She's lost. He says, "You want the covenant with me? You want to make a covenant with me?" Which is marriage. Okay. And that's why Abraham had a cross over the blood, okay? And even to these covenant rituals are still here today, okay? That's why you walk down the aisle when you get married, because these covenant rituals, they're still here. Pieces of them are still used today. That's why a wife has to walk down the aisle when she gets married. That is part of the covenant ritual. It's the same thing. What happened when Abraham walked through the blood. It's the same thing when Jesus asked these unclean women to walk through the Primordial Sea, okay, and meet him where he's at. He meets you where you are, and then together you go cross the Primordial Sea. He guides you through it, okay, and other Christians can too, but you're supposed to guide people to Jesus, not to yourself, okay? That's why there's all this marriage stuff next to the wells too. It's all connected, and together you produce children. You make babies, literally. Of course you can have literal children, and you can make them Christians, but it's about making more born again Christians, okay? It's about producing children through the Primordial Sea, and it's with God spiritually, okay? There's marriage of the soul, spirit and soul, the Holy Spirit, and then together you make babies, more born again Christians, okay? And I'm not done yet. So God uses these whales and fish to describe people who cross the Primordial Sea. And we're going to go into that right now. Sometimes Israelites are referred to as a woman because it's doing the bride of Christ thing, okay? And it's doing the producing children thing spiritually, even though it's the men too, okay? That's why when you read the Bible and it talks about the tabernacle being covered with this word right, Takash, okay? I'm probably mispronouncing it, but Takash, people fight about what it means, but sometimes it gets translated as badger, sometimes it gets translated as unicorn, but sometimes it gets translated as a sea monster or a porpoise, because God uses all of it. God uses the Israelites as this woman, because it had these cloths represent veils, all right, like a wife, get it? Like a wife, because wives wear veils. They wear veils, and they're traveling across the wilderness. They're traveling across the abyss. They are making the covenant. They are crossing God's covenant. They're doing it. And along the way, they're collecting people. It reminds me of Noah's Ark. They're crossing Primordial Sea. That's why it's described as a big whale or fish. That's why the Takash skin can be interpreted as a porpoise. Because they are this unclean woman. Everyone is an unclean woman crossing over. But you gotta make it all the way through. You can't get stuck in the middle. Okay? You get what I'm saying? And I know what everyone's gonna say. What does this have to do with Mary Magdalene? It has to do with everyone. But I'm going to bring up the Mary Magdalene thing. Because that's probably a whole nother reason why her name represents a fish or a whale. Because she represents a woman who did cross over properly. And got married to Jesus spiritually. I'm not talking about them literally getting married. Okay? I'm talking about spiritual marriage. And it's so funny because Jesus literally got into a boat and went to where she was and picked her up on a boat that is all crossing the Primordial Sea together, getting married, metaphors. And on top of that, so people will argue if Magdala was also called Tarisha, okay. Oh man, okay. That's probably using a different dialect because everyone back then could understand Hebrew-ish. Okay, the language got all tangled together. It's Greek and it's Egyptian and it's ancient Hebrew and Paleo Hebrew. That Tarshiya is probably talking about that whale skin. It's talking about that veil. Okay, the bride. Right? So the reason why God calls her a fish or a whale, because she represents one of these brides who crossed over, Jesus saved her, and she got picked off Unclean. She was an unclean woman, sinful woman who got saved and became a bride of Christ spiritually. Okay, that's probably a whole nother reason why God refers to her as a fish or a whale, because she crossed over. So the book of Revelation makes a reference to the angel of the waters, okay? And it's not just talking about supernatural beings that cross over, even though that is definitely a reference to this stuff. But I'm trying to get you to understand that when it talks about angels, it's talking about people, saved people, who have been baptized and reborn through the body and blood of Christ. They have the right to tell people what to do. They have the right to preach. Even women have the right to tell people about Jesus. Okay, that's the whole. God does use the literal women part too, because half the time the Israelites are called women. Okay, God gives women the permission to preach the gospel. Okay, but this angel has crossed over is talking about Christians who have been baptized, not just the supernatural version. Okay, who have been spiritually have already crossed over. Okay, and they have to go get everyone else. Okay, they have to guide people to the other side. People wonder why we don't just automatically just die and go to heaven when we're reborn, when we're Christians. Because we have to stay here and save everyone else, right? And you crossing over to go save someone else to make yourself a living sacrifice is what Jesus did. Jesus literally crossed the Primordial Sea. He left heaven, and he came to earth to save us, even though he probably didn't love that. I would imagine coming from heaven to here would be crazy, traumatizing. And then on top of that, he went, possibly, lots of people believe he descended into hell, which is probably just a reference to him also coming down here to get us, to save us. We're the lost souls. We're the people lost on the island, right? And we have to do the same thing when we get spiritually slaved. The point is, God already did it first. He always did it first, and we have to follow his example. Okay, and it reminds me of Adam and Eve a little bit. Technically, Eve started falling first, okay? And the more romantic way of looking at it is, how Adam took a bite of the fruit next. That was him sacrificing himself to go get her. Do you get what I'm saying? He took the plunge. He drank out of the cup of Gethsemane. He took the poison he did sacrifice himself to go get her. Okay, I'm not telling you to go literally do that. Don't delete yourself to go save somebody else, but you are going to have to make sacrifices to go save everyone else. You might have to do uncomfortable things. You might have to go to uncomfortable places. You might have to go and preach to drug addicts or people in false religions. It's just uncomfortable. It's not always fun. And you have to remember that Jesus did it first, right? You have to go get the bride, the unclean woman. All right. Anyway, but God did the nice example, and we're going to do the warning version, okay? Because God always does the warning version of you being stuck out there and staying stuck, okay? And probably the best example I can think of is Lot's wife. So Lot's wife is definitely an example of this bride who got stuck in the middle, okay? And it's so funny because God uses those marriage metaphors. He tries to spiritually marry everyone, including the men, of course. It's talking about spiritual marriage, okay? It's about just another way of saying becoming the bride of Christ and being saved, okay? And it's so funny because you think it's a coincidence that she kind of looks like a bride in this picture, right? Because the salt reminds you of a wedding dress. She got turned into a pillar of salt. And I believe God uses play on images. I don't think it's a coincidence. She represents this bride who got stuck halfway between the walk. You know what I mean? It's like she ran down the aisle the other direction. She looked back. You're not supposed to do that. Okay? And it's very interesting because I talk about how the Primordial Sea is about you being formed out of the mud, and it literally looks like she's going back into the mud. It looks like Sodom and Gomorrah is reclaiming her. Like God tried to pull her out, but she got reclaimed. It's about God trying to pull you out of the miry clay, okay, like Adam, and forming you. Get it? You get all those connections, but she got thrown back. She got put back in. Which is exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden with Satan. He got put back into the dirt, right? He got thrown down into the miry clay. It's like she's not being formed, she's being deformed. Okay? And it really reminds me of these movies where people get thrown back. It's about being thrown back. It's about being tossed back into the sea and you not being formed. And it's very creepy and interesting because even if you use the demon aspect and the unclean spirit aspect, demons and stuff, they don't have form. They don't have bodies, right? They're without form and they're void. And it's about being deformed spiritually and probably physically when you die too, okay? It's about being deformed. It's about God tried to mold you, but you said no, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and use something from the movies. I'll just end it with that. It reminds me of the movies when people turn into sludge or something like that. They look like they're being unborn. They're being reversed birth. It kind of reminds me of when Jesus talked about Judas wishing he had never been born. It's about reversing his form. It's like the birthing process in reverse, which is probably a reference of being thrown into the lake of fire and going into hell. Okay, like demons. And it's exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden. God took Satan and threw him onto the ground. He threw him back. Okay, and he threw him back into the dirt, into the clay, and deformed him. Okay, he took away his form. Anyway, so I'll just leave you with that. And so please think about this stuff, guys, and thank you.